Hey guys, tonight we slip into the past, trudge through thick mud beneath a drizzling gray sky, and finally stumble up to the crooked wooden door of a medieval tavern. Your boots soaked, your cloak dripping, and your patience already worn thin. So before you get really comfortable and fall asleep, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And hey, comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time is it where you are? I find it super interesting to see who's joining you from all over the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on the fan for that gentle hum. And let's go on tonight's journey together. You smell the place before you see it. Smoke, old beer, wet hay, and something suspiciously like onions gone rogue. A goat bleats somewhere nearby, and you're not totally sure it's not indoors. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where the roads are rutted, the inns are unpredictable, and personal hygiene is still just a rumor. And if you're lucky, you might leave this tavern with all your teeth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments too. I love seeing how far this sleepy little time machine travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You reach the door just as the wind picks up, slapping your hood back and sending a spray of cold rain down your neck. The wood of the door is heavy, dark with age and studded with iron nails that probably weren't decorative even in their prime. You lift a rusted latch and heave it open. Instant warmth and noise hit your face like a slap, made of beer foam and body odor. Inside, it's dim, lit only by a few sputtering candles and a hearth that's doing its best not to die. The air is thick with smoke that clings to the low beams like lazy ghosts. You step inside and instantly regret bringing your good boots. The floor is uneven cobblestone, half covered in hay, spilled ale, and something you're trying very hard not to identify. A few heads turn when you enter. Some nod. One man narrows his eyes at you like you've borrowed money from his cousin and forgot to pay it back. It's a warm welcome by medieval standards. You close the door behind you, but it doesn't really close. It just kind of rests against the frame with the enthusiasm of a hungover rooster. You wipe your hands on your cloak because napkins aren't a thing yet, and shuffle toward the hearth like a soggy, slightly nervous pilgrim. There's a woman with a large wooden spoon yelling at someone behind a curtain. The cook, probably. Or possibly the local judge. It's hard to tell in places like this. The tavern's main room is one large, low-ceilinged space, its dark wood beams sagging like they've seen too many centuries and not enough repairs. Tables are scattered around with no obvious pattern, as if they were placed wherever the last fight didn't break out. To your right, a group of men are huddled over what looks like a board game, made of bones and string. One of them is missing 2 fingers and laughing harder than the game probably deserves. Near the hearth, a scruffy minstrel is tuning a lute with the confidence of someone who only knows 3 chords, but plays them with gusto. There's a dog, of course. There's always a dog. It's missing an ear, sleeping under a bench, and smells exactly how you'd expect. You catch a waft of something cooking. Maybe onions, maybe old mutton, maybe the cook's boot. Hard to say, really, but your stomach growls anyway because, let's face it, traveling medieval roads burns calories and your last meal was dry bread and judgmental glances from a monk. A man to your left raises a mug in your general direction. You nod back because you're not looking to make enemies. Not until you've figured out how the latrine situation works. Someone sneezes loudly from the corner. No one says, "Bless you." That's because half the room already thinks they're cursed, and the other half are too drunk to care. Your cloak drips quietly onto the floor as you stand there awkwardly, trying to blend in like you belong. But deep down, you know the truth. You've entered a medieval tavern, and unless you play your cards right, there's at least a 12% chance you won't survive the night. And yet, it feels oddly comforting. There's a rhythm to the place. Clinks of wooden mugs, murmured gossip, the occasional burst of laughter or insult hurled across the room like a cabbage. It's chaotic, yes, but it's a lived-in chaos. You realize that, for all its grime and grumbling, this tavern is the beating heart of the village. Mainstream fact: taverns weren't just drinking spots, they were newsrooms, bulletin boards, job centers, and social media all rolled into one. Fringe tidbit: some taverns doubled as makeshift morgues during plagues. That'll really kill your buzz. Open scholarly debate: historians still argue whether taverns functioned more as democratic spaces of free speech, or government-sanctioned tools to monitor the masses. You shuffle forward, still scanning for somewhere to sit, or at least lean without catching lice. The room is loud, warm, and slightly unhinged, but you're already starting to feel the exhaustion creep in. Your muscles ache, your clothes itch, and the thought of a warm drink, even a questionable one, is enough to keep you moving. You make your way toward a low bench near the hearth. It's occupied by a man who may or may not be awake. He's slumped over with a chunk of bread in one hand and a look of betrayal on his face. You nod politely and sit as far away as the bench allows. The fire crackles, half-hearted but welcome. Sparks snap occasionally, and you notice the blackened hearthstone is carved with initials and what might be a crude drawing of a pig wearing a crown. Artistic license? Maybe. Bored farmer with a chisel? Also likely. Your boots steam gently near the fire. You wring out your cloak and set it beside you. Someone sneezes again. A child runs past carrying a chicken. No one seems concerned. You've arrived somehow in the middle of medieval nightlife, and the night is still young. You sit there for a while, absorbing it all, the heat from the fire slowly working its way into your frozen bones, the smoke from the hearth curling up your nostrils and making your eyes sting just enough to remind you you're alive. The tavern doesn't just smell like one thing. It's a festival of scents. There's roasted meat, or at least something pretending to be meat, spilled ale, wet wool, and a whiff of livestock that's too strong to be metaphorical. Someone's definitely keeping a goat inside. Probably named it. Probably lost a bet over it. The air is dense. Not in a poetic, misty kind of way. More in a, you might be breathing in someone's armpit vapor sort of way. You take a slow breath and try not to taste it. Creaky wooden beams line the ceiling, low enough that taller folks occasionally bonk their heads if they forget to duck. You wisely slouch like a seasoned medieval patron. Cobwebs cling to the corners. Not spooky Halloween cobwebs, just honest, hard-working spider cobwebs. One particularly fat spider dangles above the bar, completely unbothered by the rowdy humans below. It's probably the bartender's assistant. Behind the bar, a rough wooden counter patched with leather and beer stains, the innkeeper reigns. He's wide, grizzled, and has the kind of face that looks like it's seen things. Not dramatic things, just tiring things. Like 12 different kinds of customers, all complaining that their stew was too turnipy. He's currently arguing with a man about something involving 2 chickens and a suspicious apple. You don't ask, you just watch. A group of young men nearby are shouting at each other over a game that involves flicking stones into a circle drawn on the table with grease. The rules seem made up on the spot. One of them cheers as his stone knocks another out, spilling a mug of ale in the process. Nobody apologizes. Instead, they shout louder. Friendship in the 1300s is measured in volume and spilled drink. A lanky boy is circulating the room with a bucket and a long ladle, topping off mugs from a wooden cask. You're not entirely sure what's in it. It sloshes around like warm pond water. But people keep drinking it, so either it's decent, or it's just enough to blur out the medieval horrors of the day. Either way, your curiosity is growing. You glance up and spot a set of painted wooden plaques hanging behind the bar. They list the rules of the tavern. Most are smudged beyond reading, but one stands out. No swords above the table. Well, that's comforting. Mainstream historical fact? Medieval taverns were often smoky and dim, since chimneys weren't common in lower-class buildings until the late Middle Ages. The smoke just hung around. Fringe tidbit? Archaeologists have found medieval graffiti scratched into tavern tables. Everything from crude drawings to full-on love poems dedicated to mead. Ongoing scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether tavern smells were tolerable by contemporary standards, or if people back then were just too congested to notice. You lean back on your bench, careful not to bump into the man beside you, who you now realize has been mumbling in his sleep about haunted cheese. You decide not to follow up. The noise in the tavern is layered. There's the general low roar of conversation, half in your language, half in local dialects that sound vaguely like gargling gravel. Over that, there's the occasional clang of a dropped tankard, the squeal of a chair being dragged across stone, a short burst of laughter that sounds slightly dangerous, and music. The minstrel from earlier is still at it, strumming a lute that's missing a string, singing a ballad, with the passion of someone who's been paid in soup. The lyrics are mostly about a woman named Bess, who either drowned or eloped or baked really bad bread. It's hard to tell with his pronunciation. You kind of like it. A small girl dances nearby, barefoot on the stone floor, her hair in wild curls and her cheeks red from fire. Her mother claps along. It's a wholesome moment, which you quietly cherish before someone next to you belches loud enough to shake the rafters. You scan the crowd. Everyone's here. There's the grizzled traveler with mud-splattered boots and a sword too clean to trust. There's the farmer, red-faced and loud, telling a story about a rooster that turned demonic. Probably just hungry. There's the old woman in the corner nursing a mug of something suspiciously green, who watches you like she's seen your future and found it amusing. And then there's the local, noble type, wearing clothes one level above peasant, but acting like he owns the place. He talks loudly about taxes, occasionally slaps people on the back, and pretends he's friends with the mayor. Spoiler, he's not. You begin to notice patterns. The tables near the fire are occupied by those with coin, better boots, or louder voices. The further from the hearth, the rowdier the customers. In the darkest corner, someone might be passed out, or just very, very still. Again, you don't ask. The light in the tavern is strange. Flickering candlelight paints odd shadows on faces, making some look angelic, others like minor demons. Your own reflection in a pewter plate startles you for a second. You look tired, wind-chapped, and slightly older than when you walked in. Time moves differently in places like this. A sudden gust of wind slams the door open. Everyone looks up. Just the wind. Or maybe the ghost of someone who once lost a bet here and never left. No one gets up to close it. Eventually, the door creaks shut on its own, like it's shy. Someone near you coughs in a way that says, definitely not contagious, but sounds like you've got 2 days tops. You shift slightly away, pressing into the bench so hard you think you might leave an imprint. The fire pops again. A bit of ash floats upward. You blink slowly, the warmth making your eyelids heavy. This tavern, this strange, smoky, spirited place, is alive in every sense of the word. It's not clean, it's not quiet, and it definitely doesn't smell like cinnamon candles, but it's real. And in a world where life is often short, cold, and muddy, this chaotic, half-lit room is comfort. Of a very loud, slightly sticky variety, you pull your cloak tighter and let yourself relax. Just a little. You're not sure how long you've been sitting there by the fire, but your legs are thawing, your boots are leaking, and your stomach has started staging a small rebellion. The smell of food, if you can call it that, wafts from the rear of the tavern through a greasy curtain half hiding the kitchen. Or maybe it's just a storage room with a fire pit and a woman who threatens poultry. You decide it's time to claim a seat before the place gets any rowdier. But here's the thing about medieval taverns. They don't have hosts. There's no cheery server ready to seat you. No cozy booths or name cards. Just a free-for-all of elbows, glares, and strategic lurking. You've got to earn your seat, or steal it, or wait for someone to fall off theirs. You eye a wobbly stool near the hearth, half abandoned and currently occupied by someone's dog. You approach slowly, cautiously, like you're negotiating a medieval hostage situation. The dog opens one eye, makes a sound like a sigh mixed with a burp, then hops down with the dignity of a creature that owns more social capital than you do. You take the seat. Victory? The stool rocks slightly under your weight. One leg is shorter than the others, giving you a charming seesaw effect every time you shift. It's fine. You're not here for lumbar support. You're here to not be standing anymore. From this vantage point, you get a clearer view of the room. A few more people have trickled in, dripping, grumbling, dusting the snow or mud or whatever seasonal misery is currently falling from the sky. The tavern is slowly reaching that critical point where body heat, spilled drinks, and unwashed wool combine into a sort of atmospheric soup. A man stumbles past you carrying 2 mugs and a plate with what looks like porridge? Maybe. It could also be mashed turnips or a beige mystery. He notices your attention and winks. Best seat in the house, he says, motioning to your stool. No one's died in it since Thursday. You nod politely, unsure whether to thank him or stand up. Mainstream historical fact? Seating in medieval taverns was entirely informal. People sat where they could, often sharing benches with strangers or squatting on barrels. Personal space was a modern luxury. Fringe tidbit? In some larger taverns, customers carved their names or symbols into their favorite spots. One German tavern kept a chair reserved for a ghost. No one dared sit in it, just in case. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether seating arrangements in taverns reflected strict social hierarchies, or if they were temporarily suspended in favor of drunken egalitarianism. You test the stool again. Yep, still wobbly, but stable enough for now. A scuffle breaks out near the door, 2 men trying to claim the same bench. Voices rise, hands wave. One of them slips on something wet and sits down hard, effectively winning the argument through sheer gravity. The other walks off muttering about cursed badger luck. You make a mental note to learn that phrase. Sounds handy. You notice the locals aren't just picking seats randomly. There's a rhythm to it. Farmers seem to gather near the kitchen door, close to the stew pot and close to the gossip. Travelers hover near the fire, trying to dry out. Regulars have their spots and defend them with territorial glares and passive-aggressive shuffling. You've clearly taken someone's usual seat. A short, round man with a red nose and impressive eyebrow hair is glaring at you from across the room. He's not saying anything, but his eyes are. They say, "That's my stool, and I once bit a monk over a cheese dispute, so don't test me." You smile and raise your mug, which you just realized isn't yours. He keeps staring. Eventually he shrugs and goes to lean on the bar. You may have just made an enemy, or impressed him, or both. A young woman brushes past, carrying a tray with bread, cheese, and something in a bowl that jiggles slightly. She's balancing the tray with one hand and swatting hands away with the other. Her hair is tucked into a scarf, her sleeves rolled up, and she moves like someone who's had furniture thrown at her before and won. A group of merchants in the corner eye the tray like wolves at a buffet. One of them reaches out to grab a piece of bread and gets smacked on the wrist. Hard. She doesn't even look. Just smack. You're impressed. She sets the tray down and glances your way. You waiting for food or just sitting there for the ambiance? Food, you say. Or maybe just think it. Either way, she nods. Sit tight. I'll see what's not burnt. Progress. You've achieved potential dinner. You shift on your stool again, trying to find the least splintery angle. Your cloak is still damp, your fingers are red with cold, and your stomach growls loud enough that a nearby cat stares at you like competition. You pass the time watching the room breathe. There's a kind of choreography to it now. Servers dodging wandering drunks. Friends pulling up stools to gossip. A man falls asleep in his ale. A woman nearby sketches something with charcoal on the table. Probably rude. Laughter bubbles up in waves, mixing with the lute's off-key wail. Your eyes drift upward. The rafters above are black with soot, hung with dried herbs and bundles of something that might be onions or might be witch deterrents. There's also a shoe nailed to one beam. A single shoe. No one comments on it. A teenage boy drags a new log to the fire and pokes the coals like it owes him money. The room brightens briefly. Shadows dance across the walls. Someone behind you drops a plate, and there's a cheer. Apparently, that's how birthdays are celebrated here. You smile. Despite the noise, the smoke, and the fact that your thighs are now stuck to the stool, you feel a strange sense of belonging. Like you've slotted into the rhythm of the tavern. Like this chaotic warmth has wrapped around you and said, "Fine, you can stay, but don't touch the cheese." You relax a little more. You're no longer the outsider at the door. You're a part of the tapestry now. One thread among many, stitched into the sweaty, soot-stained quilt of medieval nightlife. Eventually, the serving girl returns, balancing a wooden trencher piled with something steaming, a heel of bread that looks like it's survived a siege, and a wooden spoon so well used it may have stories of its own. She slams the food down in front of you with an efficiency that says she's already had a long day, and it's not even close to midnight. "Stew," she grunts. "Eat it fast before the cat does." You glance down. It's brown. Brown. And lumpy, with maybe something green floating in it. Possibly a pea, possibly a leaf, possibly a dare. Still, you thank her. There's no menu, no explanation, no, "Can I see the gluten-free options?" Here. This is medieval dining at its finest. Whatever the cook made in a single pot, reheated 3 times, and served to everyone with the same level of indifference. You tear off a chunk of bread, using it as a makeshift spoon. The stew is thick, savory, and, surprise, actually not terrible. It tastes like onions, salt, something vaguely meaty, and desperation. But it's hot, and it fills your stomach in the way only medieval comfort food can. Bluntly and without subtlety. Mainstream historical. Fact? Most medieval taverns serve just 1 or 2 meals per day. Often a stew kept simmering for hours or even days over an open hearth. Freshness was optional. Fringe tidbit? Some taverns flavored their stews with whatever was cheap or growing nearby. Nettles, old beer, pickled fish brine, or even burnt bread for texture. Yum! Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether tavern meals were a true representation of medieval cuisine, or just the fast food equivalent, a far cry from what nobles or even wealthier peasants ate at home. You chew thoughtfully, ignoring the occasional crunch that may or may not be bone, or a pebble, or just a very assertive lentil. Across the room, a man slurps from a bowl and lets out a happy groan. You figure if he can survive it, so can you. A tall man with a balding head and too many teeth sidles up beside you. "Good stew tonight," he says. "Last week it tried to escape." You chuckle politely. He takes that as a sign to sit down uninvited. He introduces himself as Aldrich. You're pretty sure his cloak is made from at least 3 different animals, none of which gave consent. He smells like goat cheese and ambition. "So, what brings you to this charming dive?" he asks, dunking his bread so aggressively it splashes your sleeve. You explain vaguely, traveling through, bad weather, needed a place to dry off. He nods like that makes sense, even if it doesn't. He points to your bowl. "See that brown bit? That's either parsnip or toe knuckle. Either way, chew slow." You're not sure whether he's joking. He launches into a story about a traveling priest, a missing donkey, and a barmaid with a scar shaped like the Virgin Mary. You smile, nod, and let the words wash over you. Half of it is probably made up, or all of it. But here, stories are as essential as food and ale. Truth is optional. Delivery is everything. You take another bite of stew. There's a hint of something spicy in this mouthful. Either a peppercorn or a mistake. Behind you, someone sings a verse of a drinking song so out of tune it could curdle milk. People join in anyway, banging mugs on the tables. The rhythm is infectious. You start tapping your spoon, which earns a grin from Aldrich. That's the spirit, he says. Eat, sing, survive. That's the motto here. You glance around at the other diners. Some eat quietly, heads down, lost in thought or fatigue. Others shovel food like it's their last meal. One man carefully picks out anything green, setting it aside like he's been personally wronged by vegetables. A woman near the hearth has a baby on her lap and a mug balanced expertly on her knee. She's spooning stew into her mouth between lullaby verses. Multitasking, medieval style. The bread, for all its staleness, serves as the great equalizer. Everyone eats it. Crusts are used to scoop, to share, to bribe. One child uses it to trap a bug. The bug escapes. The bread does not. You finish your bowl and resist the urge to lick it. Barely. The serving girl comes back and takes your bowl with the speed of someone who's been stolen from before. More? She asks, in the tone of someone who secretly hopes you say no. You shake your head. She grunts and moves on. You lean back, full for the first time in days. Or at least full enough. The kind of full where you could nap for 30 minutes or fight a duck. Either way, you're feeling stronger. Then Aldrich stands suddenly. Be right back, he says. Nature calls. He doesn't head toward a restroom, of course. Just out the side door, into the dark. And that's when it hits you. You need to ask about the latrine. But who do you ask? The barmaid? The guy with a knife in his boot? The mysterious man who hasn't moved since you arrived and might actually be a statue? You decide to investigate yourself. Carefully. You stand up, stretching your legs, feeling the stew settle like a warm brick. You scan the room and head toward the least crowded corner where you hope a door leads somewhere usable. Instead, you find a broom closet with a goat in it. The goat looks at you like you interrupted its moment. You back away respectfully. Eventually, you spot a narrow side passage with a draft and a suspicious smell. Jackpot. The tavern latrine, if you can call it that, is an outhouse-style shack barely attached to the main building. It leans left. A single lantern flickers beside. Inside is a wooden seat with a hole and nothing else. No water, no privacy, no mercy. You do what needs doing. Quickly. Quietly. You emerge changed. Maybe spiritually. Mainstream fact? Most medieval taverns had extremely basic or no latrines. Patrons used pits, outhouses, or nearby bushes. Chamber pots were also common, especially inside at night. Fringe tidbit? Some fancier inns hired boys to empty chamber pots called gong farmers. They were paid surprisingly well because absolutely no one else wanted the job. Ongoing scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether latrine locations were guided by sanitation or just whichever corner already smelled bad. You return to your seat, wiser. A little colder, a little humbler. And somehow, more relaxed. Because you've eaten, found a seat, conquered the medieval bathroom gauntlet, and survived. Not bad for your first hour inside the tavern. You return to your beloved stool, which now feels suspiciously damp, and settle in once again. Your belly is pleasantly weighted with stew, your legs have remembered how to be legs, and your cloak has graduated from soaked to moist. Progress. Now your attention shifts to the other vital liquid of medieval tavern life. The drinks. You glance around and realize that everyone, and I mean everyone, is drinking something. Tankards slosh, mugs clink. Clay jugs are passed back and forth with all the trust of a sacred ritual. You need a drink. Not because you're thirsty, though you probably are, Eden, but because drinking here isn't just hydration. It's initiation. It's the medieval version of saying, yes, I will participate in this social experiment with no seatbelts. You make your way to the bar, careful not to step on the dog again. The innkeeper gives you a long look, then raises an eyebrow. What'll it be? He says. His voice sounds like it's been filtered through gravel and sarcasm. You pause. You have 3 options. Sort of. Ale, mead, water. One of these things is not like the others, and one of them is actively discouraged unless you enjoy stomach worms and regret. You point to a battered wooden tankard and say, ale. Grunts approvingly, then dips the tankard into a small cask behind the counter. No measuring, no foam art. Just a slosh, a slop, and a wipe on what might be a formerly white cloth. He hands it to you. You hand him 2 coins, unsure if that's correct. He shrugs and pockets them both. Good enough. You take a sip, and immediately question your life choices. It's warm, flat. Tastes like wet bread left in the sun too long. There's a hint of sourness, a whisper of barley, and possibly a suggestion of feet. But it's not bad exactly, it's just enthusiastic. You take another sip. It grows on you, like moss. Mainstream historical fact? Medieval ale was unfiltered, uncarbonated, and often brewed with local ingredients, making each batch unique. And yes, it was often safer to drink than the water. Fringe tidbit? In some regions, ale was brewed without hops and flavored instead with herbs like yarrow, mugwort, and, brace yourself, fermented tree bark. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether medieval people preferred ale to water because of taste, or simply because water sources were too risky to trust. You settle back into your seat, now equipped with a drink, and watch as the tavern starts to transform with each passing hour. The volume increases, not just the sound, but the feeling of the room. Conversations get louder, laughter gets throatier, and gestures become more dramatic. People start to lean into each other, share stories, slap backs, clink mugs. There's a rhythm to it, uneven but strangely musical. You spot a man nursing a mug of something golden. Mead. He catches your eye and raises it in a silent toast. You nod back. He ambles over and offers you a taste, pouring a splash into your tankard. You sip. Mead is different. It's sweeter, thicker, and tastes like honey and heat. There's a floral note, a lingering warmth that spreads through your chest like a hug from an enthusiastic bear. He grins. Made from bees, he says proudly, as though he personally squeezed the bees himself. You thank him. He sits and begins a long, meandering tale about a lost goat, a priest's robe, and a very confusing wedding. Halfway through, you realize he's describing this tavern, and the goat might still be in the broom closet. You sip your drink and let it wash over you. The man beside you, call him Oswin, though you're pretty sure he made that up, starts teaching you a drinking song. It has 12 verses, most of them involving pigs, questionable love stories, and things that definitely shouldn't be used as instruments. You join in around verse 4. By verse 6, you're actually enjoying yourself. By verse 8, you're harmonizing with a toothless woman, 2 tables over, who's hitting spoons against a mug like a pro. The ale keeps coming, or maybe your cup is just haunted by generosity. The dog comes back and sits under your bench, a silent truce. You drop a crust of bread. It disappears instantly. Someone spills a drink behind you and a cheer goes up. Someone else starts banging on the table in rhythm. The lute player from earlier has now been joined by a fiddler, and together they're butchering a melody with infectious enthusiasm. You're warm. You're tipsy. You're happy. And then someone offers you water. You freeze. It's a young boy, maybe a tavern apprentice, holding a wooden cup with clear liquid sloshing dangerously close to the ice rim. From the well, he says, fresh. You make eye contact with Oswin, who slowly shakes his head. Only if you want to meet your ancestors early. You politely decline and hand him a coin instead. He looks disappointed but scampers off. Mainstream historical fact. Wells and towns were often contaminated by poor sewage systems, waste disposal, and general medieval indifference to germ theory. Boiling water helped, but most folks trusted beer more. Fringe tidbit? Some inns mixed weak ale with water to stretch supplies, called small beer, which was often given to children and monks. Yes, even the monks. Open scholarly debate? Historians still debate how often people really drank untreated water, or whether even peasants knew to avoid certain sources instinctively. You turn back to your ale, which now tastes a bit better after the water scare. The table next to yours has started a drinking game that involves flipping coins, singing nursery rhymes backward, and trying not to pass out. A man loses a round and has to kiss the dog. He does. The dog looks unimpressed but accepting. A woman nearby is arguing that mead makes you fall in love faster, and that's why you should never drink it around poets. Someone throws a pillow at her. It's unclear whether it's affection or agreement. The innkeeper stomps through the room with another cask under one arm, grumbling about lightweights and liars. He refills mugs with the precision of a man who's done this every night for decades. Or centuries. The fire crackles, the music plays, the drinks flow, and you, dear traveler, are no longer an outsider watching from the shadows. You're part of the tavern's bloodstream now, slightly inebriated, comfortably stuffed, a little smoky, and surrounded by laughter. This, you realize, is what kept medieval life tolerable. A warm room, a bad drink, and good company. You clink your mug against Oswin's, toasting to goats, ghosts, and questionable choices. You're home, at least for tonight. Rim. From the well, he says. Fresh. You make eye contact with Oswin, who slowly shakes his head. Only if you want to meet your ancestors early. You politely decline and hand him a coin instead. He looks disappointed but scampers off. Mainstream historical fact? Wells and towns were often contaminated by poor sewage systems, waste disposal, and general medieval indifference to germ theory. Boiling water helped, but most folks trusted beer more. Fringe tidbit? Some inns mixed weak ale with water to stretch supplies, called small beer, which was often given to children and monks. Yes, even the monks. Open scholarly debate? Historians still debate how often people really drank untreated water, or whether even peasants knew to avoid certain sources instinctively. You turn back to your ale, which now tastes a bit better after the water scare. The table next to yours has started a drinking game that involves flipping coins, singing nursery rhymes backward, and trying not to pass out. A man loses a round and has to kiss the dog. He does. The dog looks unimpressed but accepting. A woman nearby is arguing that mead makes you fall in love faster, and that's why you should never drink it around poets. Someone throws a pillow at her. It's unclear whether it's affection or agreement. The innkeeper stomps through the room with another cask under one arm, grumbling about lightweights and liars. He refills mugs with the precision of a man who's done this every night for decades or centuries. The fire crackles, the music plays, the drinks flow, and you, dear traveler, are no longer an outsider watching from the shadows. You're part of the tavern's bloodstream now, slightly inebriated, comfortably stuffed, a little smoky, and surrounded by laughter. This, you realize, is what kept medieval life tolerable. A warm room, a bad drink, and good company. You clink your mug against Oswin's, toasting to goats, ghosts, and questionable choices. You're home, at least for tonight. Rim. From the well, he says. Fresh. You make eye contact with Oswin, who slowly shakes his head. Only if you want to meet your ancestors early. You politely decline and hand him a coin instead. He looks disappointed but scampers off. Mainstream historical fact? Wells in towns were often contaminated by poor sewage systems, waste disposal, and general medieval indifference to germ theory. Boiling water helped, but most folks trusted beer more. Fringe tidbit? Some inns mixed weak ale with water to stretch supplies, called small beer, which was often given to children and monks. Yes, even the monks. Open scholarly debate? Historians still debate how often people really drank untreated water, or whether even peasants knew to avoid certain sources instinctively. You turn back to your ale, which now tastes a bit better after the water scare. The table next to yours has started a drinking game that involves flipping coins, singing nursery rhymes backward, and trying not to pass out. A man loses a round and has to kiss the dog. He does. The dog looks unimpressed but accepting. A woman nearby is arguing that mead makes you fall in love faster, and that's why you should never drink it around poets. Someone throws a pillow at her. It's unclear whether it's affection or agreement. The innkeeper stomps through the room with another cask under one arm, grumbling about lightweights and liars. He refills mugs with the precision of a man who's done this every night for decades. Or centuries. The fire crackles. The music plays, the drinks flow, and you, dear traveler, are no longer an outsider, watching from the shadows. You're part of the tavern's bloodstream now, slightly inebriated, comfortably stuffed, a little smoky, and surrounded by laughter. This, you realize, is what kept medieval life tolerable. A warm room, a bad drink, and good company. You clink your mug against Oswin's, toasting to goats, ghosts, and questionable choices. You're home, at least for tonight. By now, the tavern is in full swing, alive like a beehive that's discovered fermented honey. The fire blazes, voices swell, mugs clink with reckless abandon, and the air buzzes with stories that range from grandiose to utterly unhinged. It's time for the evening's entertainment. Not arranged, of course, no formal program. Just the organic chaos of people doing whatever they can to delay the cold, dark walk home. Or sleep in a room that might also be storing turnips. You spot the lute player again. He's returned to his corner, now missing 2 strings but still playing, strumming with all the fervor of someone who believes sheer willpower can substitute for tuning. A woman joins him, gray-haired, wearing a shawl and confidence, and begins to sing. Her voice is rough like old leather, but strangely melodic. She belts out a tale about a miller, a duck, and an unfortunate wedding night. It's part ballad, part cautionary tale, and completely unfit for polite society. Which, lucky for you, this tavern absolutely isn't. The crowd claps along, some in time, most just trying not to spill their drinks. Someone throws a crust of bread in approval. You're not sure whether that's an insult or a compliment, but the singer catches it midair and takes a bite mid-verse. Professional? Mainstream historical fact? Live music was common in taverns, with traveling minstrels performing ballads, religious parodies, or even satirical songs about local lords, assuming said lords weren't in the room. Fringe tidbit? Some musicians were paid not in coin but in food, drink, or the right to sleep near the hearth. Prime real estate in a place with unheated rooms and window holes instead of glass. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether tavern musicians helped preserve oral histories, or simply spread wildly inaccurate rumors through catchy tunes. The music fades into laughter, and soon the dice come out. Wooden cubes, slightly uneven, clatter onto a tabletop as a group of laborers settle into a game that appears to involve luck, lying, and a lot of creative swearing. They invite others to join, shouting rules that contradict each other every few minutes. It doesn't seem to matter. The goal isn't winning, it's participation. And maybe, just maybe, clearing enough debt to afford another round. One man rolls a perfect pair and yells, "St. Cuthbert's breeches!" Finally, he's immediately accused of cheating, which he denies with the righteousness of someone who definitely cheated. You watch with amusement as the accusation escalates into a theatrical wrestling match of fake indignation, arm-waving, and exaggerated gasps. They eventually settle it with a handshake and a shared mug. Friendship, medieval style. Oswin leans over to you and says, "Never bet against a man with his own dice." Then he tosses a pair onto your table. You roll. Snake eyes. He pats your shoulder. "Tough luck. Buy me a drink." You do. It feels right. Just then, a table collapses behind you. A man had leaned back too far in his chair and brought the whole thing down with him. Food and drink flying. There's a pause. Silence. Then the entire tavern erupts into cheers. A stranger helps him up. Someone else picks up the food, and a new round of drinks appears like magic. No judgment, just applause. And you realize something else about this place. Failure is entertainment. Falling is funny. As long as no one breaks anything vital, everyone wins. A young man stands up on a bench and begins to recite a poem. It's earnest, dramatic, and includes far too many references to sheep. People listen anyway. When he finishes, there's genuine applause. Even a drunk in the corner mutters, "Not bad for a shepherd." Mainstream historical fact? Poetry, riddles, and storytelling were common evening pastimes in taverns, often blending humor, local gossip, and political commentary into a single dramatic recitation. Fringe tidbit? In some places, customers were expected to contribute entertainment if they couldn't afford their tab. That meant singing, juggling, or even confessing embarrassing stories. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether tavern storytelling helped foster communal identity or just served as the medieval version of shouting into the void. You sip your ale, watching as a pair of older women begin what appears to be an impromptu dance. It involves clapping, stomping, and yelling at anyone in their way. It's surprisingly graceful and deeply chaotic. They finish with a synchronized twirl that ends in laughter and spilled ale. They bow. The tavern cheers. You're next to the hearth again, this time sharing space with a merchant who's deep into a very dramatic tale about being robbed by a monkey in Marseille. You're pretty sure he's exaggerating, mostly because halfway through the story, the monkey learns how to pick locks. Someone throws a chunk of cheese at him. He catches it. Story continues. A cat climbs onto a nearby bench and curls up next to a sleeping man. A rat scurries under another table. No one screams. This is just background color. A new musician arrives. This one has a drum, a simple frame drum, which he taps with his fingers in a rhythm that makes your foot tap involuntarily. The music shifts the mood. People start swaying. Someone picks up a spoon and adds to the beat. Then a jug. Then someone starts whistling. Before you know it, the whole tavern is making music. Not a song exactly, but a kind of groove. It builds, rises, and crashes into chaotic, joyful noise. And when it ends, there's a hush. Just for a second. A collective exhale. And then someone burps loud enough to restart the universe. Laughter returns. The fire pops. And a man near the door begins to mimic a rooster. You're not entirely sure why, but it's working. Oswin looks at you. See? No cathedral choir can match this. You nod. Not because it's musically correct, but because he's right in spirit. You feel a hand on your shoulder. The serving girl again. She smirks. You looked too peaceful. Had to fix that. Then she hands you a boiled egg with a tiny face drawn on it. You stare. She shrugs. Entertainment. It's got layers. You laugh, not just from the absurdity, but from the warmth of it. This tavern, for all its filth and noise and borderline collapse, is full of moments like this. Small, strange joys shared between people with nothing in common except the desire to be less alone for a while. And here you are, right in the middle of it. An audience member, a participant, a drinker, a watcher, a traveler in time. The longer you sit in the tavern, the more invisible you become. And that's a good thing. You're no longer the strange new face who walked in soggy and wide-eyed. Now you're just another silhouette by the fire, another shape in the smoky mosaic. And when that happens, when the room stops noticing you, that's when you start to really notice the room. You lean back on your stool, wobbly, loyal, and probably cursed, and listen, not just to the music or the clatter of mugs, but to the steady hum of stories being traded like currency. Over at the table near the stairs, a man's whispering with the hushed urgency of someone who definitely thinks he knows a secret that could change the kingdom. He's talking about witches in the woods, or maybe wolves. His listeners nod seriously and sip from their mugs like they're absorbing state secrets, or just trying not to laugh. At the far end of the tavern, a group of travelers are swapping tales about the road. Bandits with glowing eyes, an inn where the stew stirred itself, and a haunted bridge that screams at night. The woman telling that last one has a voice like velvet and a scar across her nose that makes everything she says sound instantly more credible. You shift your gaze to a bench by the door where two old men are debating whether or not the Black Death was caused by sinful shoemaking. One of them insists it all started when people stopped blessing their boots. The other counters that it was actually cursed cheese. Historians might have a few objections. Mainstream historical fact? Medieval taverns were hotbeds for the local gossip, traveling news and political rumors. With no printing press and no internet, word of mouth ruled the world, and taverns were its loudest echo chambers. Fringe tidbit? Some taverns kept chalkboards or scraps of parchment near the door with doodles, poems, or even public notices, like warnings about bad weather, pickpocket, or cows in heat. Open to scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether gossip in taverns fueled rebellion and resistance, or whether it mostly functioned as entertainment, helping people vent frustrations without ever leaving their mugs. A merchant sits down beside you. He smells like wax and old parchment, and says his name is Hugo, though it could also be Hugh or Huge, or just a very confident lie. He launches into a tale of traveling to the Low Countries where he claims he saw a boat powered by geese. Not pulled by geese, powered by them. You sip your ale, nodding with the solemn face of someone who is absolutely not calling him out. Because frankly, you'd love to see a goose-powered boat. Someone should try that again. The tavern's rhythm begins to shift. The early evening energy, all rowdy singing and cup thumping, is slowing down, settling into something looser, softer. Not quiet exactly, but cozier. People speak with their faces closer now. The stories aren't for the whole room anymore. They're for their circle, their bench, their friend. And the stories? Oh, they're weird. You hear about a man who married a hedgehog, a woman who turned her husband into a turnip, and a farmer who claims his cow gives milk only when sung to in Latin. No one laughs at these stories, they nod, because in this world, the line between true and false is blurry. But the line between believable and entertaining? That's all that matters. Your friend Oswin returns holding a slightly cracked mug filled with something deep red. You raise an eyebrow. Berry wine, he says. Made by the widow with the good teeth. You're intrigued. He hands it over. You sip. It's sharp, sweet, and leaves a tingle on your tongue like it's slightly carbonated and slightly enchanted. Oswin leans in. Careful. 2 mugs of that and you'll marry a tree. You both laugh, though a man 2 stools over suddenly looks panicked. You decide not to ask. Nearby, a serving girl perches on a table, legs swinging, telling a tale about a ghost pig that haunts the nearby fields. Apparently, it only appears to bachelors and steals their shoes. The locals nod along like this is just common knowledge. An older woman listens, then counters with her own tale. About a lake that hisses when you walk past at night. That's where Drowned Baker lives, she says. You hear him kneading. Kneading, not kneading. You blink. She's serious. Mainstream historical fact? Medieval people believed deeply in omens, ghosts, and supernatural creatures. Stories served to explain the unexplainable, and were often swapped and shaped in social spaces like taverns. Fringe tidbit? In some regions, a certain kind of toast, burned black, was believed to ward off night spirits if eaten before bed, which might explain a few things about the stew, come to think of it. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether medieval ghost stories were rooted in cultural trauma, like plagues and war, or were simply a socially acceptable way to discuss death, guilt, and local anxieties. At your table, the stories keep coming. One man claims he once saw the moon blink. A woman insists her grandmother cured hiccups by shouting into wells. Someone else believes if you drink from a pig's footprint on a full moon, you'll dream of your future spouse. You make a mental note never to test that theory, but for every absurdity, there's something oddly comforting. Like how the farmer with the muddy boots talks about his fields like they're old friends. Or how the baker's apprentice describes bread dough like a living thing. Or how Oswin, probably lying, possibly drunk, swears he once made a wolf laugh. You lean into the table. You add a story of your own, not a true one maybe, but one that fits. A story about a lantern that won't go out unless you sing to it. You don't even know where it came from, but it feels right. The table listens. They nod. They believe you. Or at least they pretend to. Which, in this room, is the same thing. Someone starts a slow chant near the bar. It's a call and response song, simple, hypnotic, like a lullaby sung by drunks. You catch yourself joining in. The tavern is flickering now, like a candle nearing the end of its wick. Still warm, still alive, but a little slower, a little softer, a little more slouched. And still, the stories continue. Because the food fills the belly. The ale warms the blood. But the stories remind you that you're human, that you're not alone, that someone else has also seen a ghost chicken and lived to tell the tale. And here, in this smoky, crooked, ever louder, ever stranger tavern, that's more than enough. You've barely noticed the passage of time, how outside the wind has quieted, and the moon hangs low in the sky like a gossiping old woman peeking through the shutters. Inside, the tavern still pulses with life, but there's a shift happening. Not in noise or numbers, those stay high, but in tone. It starts with the innkeeper. You watch him move through the room not just as a man pouring drinks and yelling at the boy to stop eating the dried peas meant for the soup, but as someone who's far more involved than you first realized. He leans into whispered conversations. He hands off wrapped parcels when no one's looking. He even very discreetly scribbles something onto a small piece of parchment and tucks it into a girl's satchel. She leaves 5 minutes later without ever having bought a drink. You begin to suspect the innkeeper has side hustles. A man at your table, older, cloaked in mystery and moth holes, nudges you and says, "That one?" He's not just pouring ale, he's pouring information. Then he laughs like he said something profound. You smile nervously. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval towns and villages, innkeepers often doubled as informal messengers, informants, moneylenders, or even bailiffs. A tavern was the perfect place to gather and leak news. Fringe tidbit? Some taverns in Europe were known unofficially as spy houses, where rival cities or guilds placed listeners to catch early whiffs of trade secrets or political murmurs. And yes, even monks spied. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether tavern owners held real social power, or simply survived by being neutral, silent, and incredibly good at pretending they heard nothing. You notice it now. The innkeeper's gaze scans the room constantly like a chess master watching a very messy game. He knows who's drunk, who's pretending, who came in with too many coins, who left with too few. A merchant at a nearby table seems a little too nervous as he unwraps a roll of cloth to show a client. The innkeeper slides by, nods once, and moves on. Deal approved. Then there's the man in the back corner who hasn't said a word since you arrived. He nurses a mug like it owes him rent and wears a patch over one eye that might be fake. No one speaks to him, but he watches everything, and the innkeeper always passes his table last. Coincidence? You think not. At your own table, Oswin whispers, "Don't ask about the guy with the patch." You didn't ask. He adds, "Definitely don't ask him if the patch is real." Again, you hadn't planned to, but now you definitely won't. You become increasingly aware that this tavern, this loud, messy, joyful building, isn't just a place to drink. It's a network. Every bench is a meeting. Every toast is a negotiation. Every spilled drink, possibly staged. You catch a flash of silver under the table near the stairs. A quick handoff between a wiry young man and an older woman in red. Money? Medicine? Secrets? Could be pickled fish for all you know, but the way they didn't make eye contact? Definitely suspicious. The serving girl walks past and drops a bundle of herbs on the lap of a hunched man in the corner. She doesn't stop. He doesn't say thank you, he pockets it. Later, that same man trades a small wooden token with a pilgrim by the door. No words exchanged. Just a glance and a nod. You're beginning to suspect that everyone here is up to something. Mainstream historical fact? Tokens, tallies, and slates were used in taverns to track debt or mark favors owed. Some even doubled as credit systems, especially in places where coin was scarce. Fringe tidbit? There were known tavern tokens, minted in cities like London that could only be spent at specific establishments. Essentially medieval store credit. Some carried secret markings that could be read under heat or oil. Spycraft meets ale. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether such systems were primarily economic tools, or if they functioned as coded social contracts, linking people across classes and regions. You're midway through your third drink when the local reeve strolls in. Everyone stiffens. He's not in armor. He doesn't shout. He just enters like someone who's used to being noticed and obeyed. You feel it, the ripple. Conversations hush, eyes flicker. Even the innkeeper nods. Respect, maybe, or wariness. The reeve walks up the bar and exchanges quiet words with the innkeeper. Coins pass hands. So do 3 small scrolls and a pouch that jingles. Then he turns, surveys the room, and for one soul-freezing moment, makes eye contact with you. Just a second. Just long enough to know he's clocked you. Then he looks away. You exhale. So does everyone else. "What did you do?" Oswin whispers. "I ate the stew," you whisper back. That might have been enough. The reeve sits down. The room resumes its rhythm, but a bit more carefully. Laughter sounds a tad forced. Conversations soften. Because when the churchman arrives, you might get a warning about sin. When the reeve arrives, you get arrested. You drain your mug and pretend to be very interested in a knot in the table. Across the room, a card game starts. The players laugh too loudly, drink too fast, and one keeps peeking up at the reeve like he's expecting divine retribution with every turn. The reeve ignores him. He's busy watching the innkeeper hand over a sealed parchment to a monk who just entered through the side door. You raise your eyebrows at Oswin. "See," he says, "this place has layers." He's right. This tavern isn't just a building. It's an engine. Grinding, burning, churning gossip into gold and secrets into dinner. The regulars know it. The owners definitely know it. And now so do you. You're part of it now, whether you meant to be or not. You look down at your hands. When you first arrived, they were just cold, wet, and empty. Now they're warm, calloused, holding a mug full of mild inebriation and a dozen whispered stories. You glance up and catch the innkeeper's eye. He gives you a slow nod, just once, and moves on. Eventually, the fire starts to burn low. Not because the night is ending, but because the hearth has limits, even if the tavern doesn't. You've been yawning behind your mug for the last 20 minutes, and your eyes keep losing focus on the dancing shadows across the ceiling beams. A lute string snaps mid-song. The fiddler retires in disgrace, or maybe he just fell asleep. You realize with mild panic, you need to sleep soon. But where? You glance toward the back of the tavern, where a narrow, crooked staircase leads upward into darkness. A wooden sign dangles overhead by a single nail. It reads, "Chambers, pay first, complain quietly." You take that as your cue. A few coins and a grunt from the innkeeper later, you're handed a heavy iron key attached to a chunk of wood the size of a potato. Apparently, that's to make sure you don't lose it. Or run away with it. He jerks his thumb upward and adds, "Room 3. Don't touch the wall near the window. Or the window. Or the bucket." Comforting. You make your way up the stairs. They creak like dying birds with every step. Halfway up, you pass a sleeping dog. Inside the staircase. You step over it carefully. It doesn't move. The hallway upstairs is narrow, with doors on either side. Some ajar, some scratched, and one with what looks suspiciously like a small bite mark in the middle. You find room 3. Insert key. Twist hard. The door groans open like it, too, has regrets. Inside, you're greeted by a small wooden bed with a straw-stuffed mattress, a single candle stub on a stool, and the unmistakable smell of something sour. Possibly pickles. Possibly feet. You step inside. The floor leans slightly to the left. So does the bed. There's a thin blanket, a single pillow, and something scurries under the floorboards just as you sit down. Congratulations. You've booked a deluxe room in a medieval tavern. Mainstream historical fact. Travelers often stayed in upper rooms above taverns or inns, sleeping on straw mattresses or even on the floor if rooms were full. Comfort was a modern invention. Fringe tidbit? Some taverns charged by the space, not the room. You could rent half a bed or even just blanket access. Want privacy? Too bad. That costs extra and usually means a curtain. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether sleeping arrangements in inns reflected class divisions, or if everyone was equally miserable when the lice hit. You sit gingerly on the bed. It crunches, not in a good way. Then you lie back, arms spread, and stare up at the ceiling. There's a small hole through which you can see a bit of moonlight, or someone else's lantern, or the eye of the innkeeper checking to see if you paid. You take off your boots, which feel like medieval torture devices by now, and set them carefully beside the bed. The floor is sticky. You pretend not to notice. As you pull the blanket over you, you discover that it smells strongly of cabbage. Boiled cabbage. From last week. You adjust. The tavern sounds continue below. Muffled laughter, creaking chairs, the occasional thump of a mug hitting the floor. Someone sneezes. Someone else curses a goat. And then you hear it. A snore. From the bed next to you. Wait, you sit up. There is no second bed. You glance around and realize, oh, that pile of blankets in the corner? That's a person. A very asleep person. Wrapped like a sad burrito and snoring like a bear with the sinus problems. They don't wake. They don't move. They just emit a low, steady honk that echoes off the stone wall like a sad trombone in a tunnel. You sigh. Of course. Mainstream historical fact? Bed sharing among strangers was incredibly common in medieval times, especially in taverns, inns, and way stations. Travelers could be packed in, 2 or 3 to a bed. Fringe tidbit? Some inns had ropes strung across rooms where drunkards could pay to lean on the rope and nap upright. It was cheaper than a bed, and a lot harder to fall off. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether people genuinely slept soundly in these arrangements, or simply passed out from exhaustion. Noise be damned. You pull the blanket tighter, trying not to think about shared lice. The snoring continues. The room smells of stew, wool, and centuries of collective regret. You lie still. You hear a rat squeak in the wall. You lie very still. Then, something amazing happens. Your body gives up. Not in defeat, more like surrender. The warmth of the room, the ache in your muscles, the weight of the blanket, it all conspires to lull you towards sleep. The snoring doesn't stop, but it becomes rhythmic. The floor creaks, but in a friendly way. The smell of cabbage, still terrible, but somehow comforting now. Like you've bonded over your mutual suffering. And downstairs the tavern breathes on without you. Louder, rowdier, and still spilling ale like it grows on trees. But you're done. You close your eyes and fall asleep in a crooked bed in a crooked room, above the loudest, weirdest, warmest place you've ever stumbled into. And somehow it feels exactly right. Morning hits you not with sunlight or gentle birdsong, but with a rooster shrieking directly beneath your window. It sounds like it's halfway through a dramatic monologue and deeply resentful of your existence. You blink awake. The room is dim, the air heavy with wood smoke and what might be someone's lingering garlic breath. Your unnamed snoring roommate has vanished, leaving only a suspiciously warm spot on the floor and half a biscuit. You sit up slowly, body creaking like the inn staircase. Your head pulses. Not quite a hangover, but more like a mild, why did I drink something that tasted like sour bread and bees? Throb. Your mouth tastes like wool and regrets. Boots on, cloak on. You brave the hallway again, nodding to a sleepy man who's clutching a chicken under one arm and an empty wineskin under the other. He doesn't acknowledge you. Fair enough. Back downstairs, the tavern is barely recognizable. Gone is the chaos. The laughter, the clinking mugs and rogue spoons and whispered ghost stories. Instead, you walk into something more peculiar. A hybrid of post-party wreckage and civic center. 3 tables are stacked awkwardly in the corner. A woman is sweeping the floor with the determination of someone who is this close to burning the whole place down. A group of men sit at the bar, sipping watered-down ale and talking like they're in church. And in the middle of it all, a farmer is bartering over a live goose. Yes, really, a goose, on a leash. You step aside quickly as the bird flaps its wings in indignation and honks like it too. Had a rough night. Turns out, in the morning light, the tavern takes on a new role. It's not just a drinking den, it's the village nerve center. Mainstream historical fact? Taverns in medieval towns often served as informal town halls. People came to hear news, make trades, pay debts, deliver messages, and even settle legal disputes, sometimes before noon. Fringe tidbit. In some villages, the tavern was the only public space available for announcements. Town criers would stand on benches and shout the latest proclamations right between breakfast orders. Open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether taverns were spontaneous community centers or whether local authorities deliberately steered gatherings there to keep an eye on public sentiment. Easier to manage gossip when it's all in one room. You make your way to the bar. The innkeeper is back at his post, eyes red, face unshaven but alive and moving. He grunts a good morning and hands you a mug of something warm. You don't ask what it is, you drink it. It's not bad. It's also not good. It's a liquid of some kind. You nod gratefully and turn back toward the room. At one table, a young scribe is reading out a letter. He clears his throat often, mispronounces names, and seems to be adding little flourishes of his own. Your cousin says he is well and sends, 17 pigs and a wooden token of affection. You're pretty sure the letter didn't say that. Still, everyone nods solemnly, like these are the sacred words of a prophet. A girl runs in from the cold, breathless, carrying a satchel. She hands a folded note to the innkeeper, who reads it, grunts, and posts it onto a nail by the bar. It's barely legible, but you catch the words, "Blacksmith closed, lost his tongs in a card game." You sit near the fire again, which is now embers, and observe. The room feels entirely different, less performative, more practical. The performances of last night were masks and mischief. Now it's all transactions, obligations, corrections, and hangovers. A boy runs in and delivers a message to the reeve, who has returned and is now sitting at a corner table, reviewing a list and shaking his head slowly. Two farmers argue over who owns a pig that wandered into the bakery and reportedly ate half a loaf. The baker insists the pig must be punished. The pig, of course, is not present. The reeve listens with tired eyes and scribbles something onto parchment. Justice, medieval style. Nearby, a carpenter and a thatcher exchange coins and spit into their palms before shaking hands. A deal is struck. Possibly over lumber, possibly over beer, possibly both. Then, in one corner of the room, a man stands up and clears his throat with the pomp of someone about to make a formal announcement. "Friends," he says, "I have once again lost my shoes. If anyone sees a pair of brown leather boots with one broken lace and the smell of destiny, please return them. To my bench." Polite applause. Mainstream historical fact? Local transactions, including employment, dispute resolution, marriage arrangements, and debt settlements, often occurred inside taverns. There were few formal offices, so business happened wherever people gathered. Fringe tidbit? Some taverns had designated tables for certain tasks, like the tax table where villagers reported their crops, or the guild table where apprentices were tested or sworn in. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether the blending of legal, social, and commercial functions inside taverns strengthened local autonomy, or created chaotic gray zones where rules were optional. You see it clearly now. This place isn't just where people come to escape the world. It's where they come to run it. The tavern is a bank, a court, a messenger's office, a negotiation room, a job board, and, if you're lucky, somewhere to find your missing boots. Oswin appears beside you, carrying a hunk of bread and what might be a cold piece of fish. "Good morning," he croaks. "At least I think it is." You ask if he's doing business today. "Always," he grins. "And sometimes I even know what it is I'm trading." He pulls a small wooden disc from his pouch and places it on the table. "Guild token," he says. "Don't ask which guild. The secret's part of the charm." Then he waves to the reeve like they're old enemies or cousins, possibly both. You bite into your bread. It's hard enough to chip teeth, but tastes oddly satisfying. Oswin dips his in his drink, which is something red and vinegary. He claims it's medicinal. He also claims he once dated a barmaid who was actually a duchess in disguise. You're beginning to believe everything and nothing he says. People are coming and going now, bundled against the cold, shouting greetings, handing off messages, even bringing in livestock. A man walks through the door with a chicken under each arm and yells, "I'm here for the meeting." No one questions him. A few people follow. The back room, it turns out, doubles as a meeting hall. Possibly for the bakers, possibly for a local fencing club, possibly for people who have strong opinions about turnips. You finish your bread, warm your hands near the hearth, and lean back. You realize now this isn't the end of the tavern story. It's the beginning of its day job. It's a tavern at night, but by morning, it's a heartbeat. And you, somehow, are part of its rhythm. It's not long after the Chicken Council, or whatever that meeting was, that the tavern's warm, almost sleepy atmosphere is shattered by the arrival of two figures who exude, "We are not here for bread and stew" energy. The first is a priest, tall, thin, wrapped in a black wool cloak so worn it flutters like wings behind him. His hair is close-cropped, and his eyes dart about like they're counting sins by the dozen. In his left hand, a wooden cross. In his right, a bag of scrolls. His entire presence hums with the heavy, unmistakable weight of judgment. The second, hot on the priest's heels, is a man in green, heavier built, cheeks red from wind or wine or both. He carries a long leather pouch with an iron seal at the top. It jangles when he walks. Not coin, keys. And you already know what this man is. The tax collector. Between the two of them, the mood in the room deflates faster than a leaky wineskin. You instinctively straighten your back, as if they'll notice your sins, or worse, your unpaid bills, just by looking. They stand at the center of the room like a traveling bad news troupe. The priest steps forward, unfurling a scroll with a flick that's clearly been rehearsed. He clears his throat. "Friends," he says, with a voice more fitting for funeral sermons than friendly greetings, "I bring a word of caution and urgent moral concern." Oswin leans over and mutters, "Here we go. Fire and Fleas, Part 7. Mainstream historical fact? Traveling clergy often visited taverns, not for a pint, but to remind patrons of their sinful ways. They gave sermons, heard confessions, and occasionally read official church proclamations about feast days, fasts, or, eternal damnation. Fringe tidbit. Some churches issued tavern-specific warnings called alehouse admonitions, where they warned landlords and patrons alike about excessive drunkenness, dice games, and singing about saints in an unholy key. Open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these priestly drop-ins actually discouraged sinful behavior, or just gave everyone something new to gossip about after they left. The priest begins his lecture with righteous fury. He speaks of the dangers of drink, of women with suspiciously uncovered hair, of gambling dice with the devil's fingerprints, and the sin of sleeping late after tavern revelry. You look around the room. No one is making eye contact. A few people stare into their mugs like they're about to be baptized in beer. One man starts whittling a spoon just to look busy. Even the goose seems to glare judgmentally from under the table. Then the tax collector steps up. He doesn't speak in metaphor. He doesn't mention fire or brimstone. He simply pulls out a long, narrow scroll and starts calling out names. First name. A pause. A nod. Coin is passed over the table. Second name. A grimace. The man leaves and returns with a sack that clinks. Third name. Silence. The collector frowns. Not present? The priest squints suspiciously. Or hiding, perhaps. You start to feel like this is less a visit and more a sting operation. The collector walks to the bar and exchanges quiet words with the innkeeper. A few coins pass between them. Not a bribe, just arrangement. Mainstream historical fact? Tax collectors in the medieval era were deeply unpopular, and not just because they took your money. They often operated with minimal oversight, could keep a portion of what they collected, and frequently colluded with local landlords or clergy. Fringe tidbit. In some towns, taverns doubled as temporary tax offices. The taxman would set up shop for the day, and villagers would come to pay, protest, or try to sneak out the back door. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether tavern-based tax collection made the process more efficient, or just more vulnerable to corruption and manipulation. You sip your drink cautiously. The room is holding its breath. After several more names, the collector announces, "Anyone caught brewing without license shall be fined twice the normal rate." The serving girl drops a tray behind the bar. The priest glances at her. She shrugs and picks up the pieces, whistling like she has nothing to hide. Oswin nudges you again. "That's her third offense," he whispers. "Not bad for a Tuesday." You glance over at the hearth, where a few men appear to be praying, but you notice one of them slipping a coin under the bench. To whom? For what? You're no longer sure who's watching who. The priest finally closes his scroll with a snap and declares, "Let this be a lesson. Repentance is cheaper than penance." The taxman nods solemnly, then makes his way toward the stairs, presumably to check the ledgers in the upstairs rooms, or shake down a merchant who thought they'd escaped under cover of stew. The priest lingers, asking if anyone wishes to confess. No one moves. The goose honks. Then, as suddenly as they arrived, the priest gathers his things and leaves. The taxman follows, scroll tucked away, pouch now heavier than before. They don't say goodbye, they just go. And the tavern exhales. Oswin drains the rest of his drink and murmurs, "Worse than fleas in your bedroll, those two." The innkeeper grunts in agreement and pours himself a drink. Slowly, cautiously, the room begins to recover. Dice reappear, bread is passed. Someone clears their throat and begins humming the opening notes of a tavern song about alewives and angels. You look around at the faces, tired, wary, but somehow undeterred. They've been through this before, and they'll go through it again, because taverns don't just survive visits from the church and crown, they absorb them, laugh about them, and eventually turn them into drinking songs. One man nearby raises his mug and says, "To Father Grimm and Mr. Pockets." A few chuckles, a few toasts. The tavern lives on, slightly poorer, possibly more sinful, definitely louder. And once again, you're reminded that here in this crooked room of crooked people and crooked coins, everything is performance. Even righteousness. The tax collector and priest may have cast a temporary chill over the room, but nothing stirs a tavern's blood like a return to normal sinning. And nothing makes that more apparent than the sudden arrival of 3 women, one older, 2 younger, barging through the door with the kind of practiced authority that says, "We know exactly how loud to stomp to get noticed." The room perks up. Men straighten. A few mugs are raised mid-sip in greeting. One man immediately begins fixing his hair using a knife as a mirror. You quickly learn 2 things. The oldest woman is the alewife, and she absolutely runs this place, even if the innkeeper thinks he does. She's round as a barrel, apron starched to battlefield standards, and eyes sharp enough to cut bread. She walks straight to the bar and starts inspecting the kegs without asking. She sniffs the tap, mutters about someone watering the damn barley again, and starts barking orders to the boy behind the counter, who instantly drops a ladle and salutes with a soup spoon. The other 2 women, dressed slightly brighter with scarves pulled back to show flushed cheeks and mischievous grins, do a lap of the room, not looking for seats, just making sure they're seen. This isn't flirtation exactly. This is navigation. Because being a woman in a medieval tavern, that's a tightrope walk between respected trade and whispered scandal, and every footstep is political. Mainstream historical fact? Many taverns and alehouses were owned or operated by women, particularly widows. These alewives brewed, sold, and managed their households through beer. Some were admired, others were accused of witchcraft the minute a batch went sour. Fringe tidbit: in some areas, women were only allowed to sell ale within their own home, so they'd turn their front rooms into informal pubs, creating what became known as tippling houses. Open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether alewives were symbols of female empowerment or victims of a patriarchal system that tolerated their work only until it threatened male brewers or church authorities. The elder alewife, people call her Matilda, turns to face the room and claps once. The room quiets. She announces, "Next batch comes in on Thursday. No, you can't have it early. Yes, I did water the last one, and I'd do it again." A man near the fire laughs too hard. She raises an eyebrow, and he immediately pretends to cough. You sip your drink and watch as she moves through the tavern like a queen at market, offering insults like blessings, advice like commandments. To a young man, "Tell your wife you lost the coins in a game, not at my table." I don't need her glaring at me during Sunday prayers. To a traveler, "That tunic's from Bristol. Don't wear it in here unless you want the Thatcher to spit in your soup." To the innkeeper, "Stop serving the brown loaf." It tastes like guilt and gravel. Everyone listens, because Matilda isn't just pouring drinks, she's managing reputations. You glance at the two younger women again. One is helping serve stew, the other is now playing dice with 3 shepherds, and winning. The shepherds laugh a little too loud at her jokes. One's already lost a boot. Oswin, ever the commentator, leans in. That's Joan and Isolde, cousins. They can outdrink most of us, outsing all of us, and if you cheat at dice, you will be singing in soprano for the rest of your life. You ask if they work here, he shrugs. They help when it suits them. Mostly they help themselves. And honestly, fair enough. The truth is, in a place like this, women do 1,000 jobs at once. They brew, serve, settle fights, quiet drunks, flirt when needed, threaten when needed, and always, always keep an ear to the ground, because information flows differently when you're underestimated. A woman in the corner quietly stitches a torn sleeve for a traveler. She asks about his route, his cargo, his business. He answers casually. You realize she's just collected half a trade map for the region. Near the bar, a girl is humming as she writes tally marks in chalk. Not on paper, on the bar itself. Her eyes never leave the mugs. She knows who's drinking too fast, who hasn't paid, and who's sneaking sips from their neighbor's ale. A merchant leans over and whispers something into the ear of the serving girl, Joan. She listens, then slaps him across the cheek so loudly the lute player flinches. The room freezes. Then someone near the door goes, "He deserved that." The room agrees. Applause. Back to normal. Mainstream historical fact? Women in taverns were often viewed with suspicion, but their labor was essential. Ale brewing was one of the few trades legally open to women in many areas, and alewives wielded real economic and social influence. Fringe tidbit? A 14th century poem warns men not to trust merry brewsters, claiming their drink makes you forget your name, your home, and your purse. Probably written by a man who lost all 3 to Matilda. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue how much autonomy alewives actually had. Some say they were powerful matriarchs. Others note how frequently they were fined, shamed, or accused of sorcery when their success outpaced male-run operations. You finish your mug and look around. The tavern is no less chaotic, but there's a different kind of order now. An invisible system beneath the smoke and chatter, and much of it is held together by women like Matilda, not with brute force, but with reputation, memory, and a willingness to throw a tankard when necessary. Oswin says, "Notice how nothing burns down when she's in charge?" You nod. He continues, "And when she leaves for a day?" Pause. We get a goat stuck in the chimney, and someone challenges the reeve to a pie-eating duel, which he accepts, by the way. You smile. Matilda shuffles past you, pats your shoulder, and says, "You look like you needed something warm." You glance down. A bowl of broth has appeared in front of you. You didn't ask. You didn't pay. You don't care. You eat. It's salty and rich and undeniably real, just like her. Just like this whole place. Just when you think the tavern has settled into its warm, midday lull, broth in your belly, steam in the air, Matilda back behind the bar, doling out orders and insults, a sharp crack breaks through the calm. A clay mug hits the wall, shattering into jagged, brown teeth just inches from a sleeping hound. Everyone in the room freezes for half a second. Then, predictably, wonderfully, chaos erupts. You hear the sound before you see it. A low roar of voices, feet scraping against floorboards, a chair tipping, someone yelling, "That was my onion." And then suddenly half the tavern is on their feet. A fight has begun. Not the kind you see in epic poems or courtly romances. No gleaming swords, no noble causes. No one's defending anyone's honor. This is pure tavern-grade brawling. Fast, messy, weirdly specific, and mostly fueled by boredom, beer, and a misunderstanding about stew. At the center, two men, probably locals, locked in what can only be described as a shoving match with interpretive dance elements. One is accusing the other of stealing a bread roll. The other claims it was his own bread, which he temporarily lent to the air. A third man, uninvited, joins in and promptly gets slapped by the alewife. The dog leaves. Sensibly. You stay seated, half because it's dangerous and half because watching this unfold feels like the best theater you've seen in weeks. Mainstream historical fact? Fights in taverns were incredibly common in medieval Europe. Many records exist of brawls, knife fights, food-throwing incidents, and full-on riots that started with spilled drinks and ended with someone losing an ear. Fringe tidbit? In some towns, frequent fighters were banned from taverns entirely, and their names were carved into the beams or posted on the walls as a warning. In others, brawls were expected, and landlords simply charged extra for broken chairs. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether tavern violence was a symptom of societal pressure, or a kind of release valve where grievances could be aired in a semi-ritualized space with relatively low stakes. You watch as someone hurls a chunk of cheese like a discus. It hits a minstrel. He gasps, dramatically clutches his chest, and collapses into the firewood pile. Applause. Meanwhile, a man in the corner starts chanting, "Bread fight! Bread fight! Bread fight!" No one joins in, but you admire the commitment. Matilda, who has seen this all before, does not panic. She slams a spoon against a pewter mug, bell-like and sharp. Next person to throw food gets to clean the stew pot with their tongue. Silence. Then sheepishly the two bread fighters disengage. One adjusts his tunic. The other mutters something about personal yeast boundaries. They sit. Someone hands them drinks. The show is over. Oswin leans toward you and says, "That was actually pretty mild. You should have been here the night of the Great Sausage Skirmish." You stare. He nods solemnly. 3 injured. 1 emotionally. As the dust settles, mugs are righted, stew bowls are refilled, and someone starts strumming a lute to gently signal that we're all pretending nothing happened. You admire the resilience. Moments ago, this place was a war zone. Now, back to community notice board. Someone tosses a coin toward the minstrel, still dead in the firewood. He springs up, bows, and launches into a song called "The Ballad of the Stolen Bun." Instant classic. A man next to you chuckles, showing a gap where a tooth should be. Best entertainment you'll get all week, and nobody died this time. You take another sip of ale. It's true, there's a strange comfort in the ritual of it all. Fights don't end friendships. Bread doesn't always stay in bowls. And sometimes you just need to throw something before you can sit down and finish your stew. Near the back, the serving girl, Joan, is reassembling a toppled table. Isolde fans herself dramatically, claiming she got wounded by a rogue cabbage. Someone gives her a piece of cake. She accepts it like an award. The innkeeper, meanwhile, counts broken plates and sighs like a man balancing love and despair. Matilda walks by your table and drops off a plate of pickled turnips without a word. You didn't order them. You eat them anyway. They're terrible. But you eat them anyway. You glance toward the ceiling beam and spot a familiar sight. A chalkboard list. It reads, "Tavern offenses this week. Slapping with intent to entertain. Unauthorized cheese launch. Singing falsetto without cause. Goose-related insults. Arguing theology during stew hour." You blink. That actually explains a lot. Mainstream historical fact? Some taverns kept logs, unofficial of course, of patrons' antics. These were used both to shame and entertain. A customer who made the list might get a free drink, or get banned for a week. Fringe tidbit. In certain places you could pay off an offense by performing a joke, a dance, or a short poem. Tavern justice was flexible and sometimes hilariously inconsistent. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether these practices created a self-regulating tavern culture, or simply masked the deeper tensions of a fractured, unequal society with slapstick chaos. Back at your table, Oswin places a small piece of wood in front of you. It has a crude sketch of a man being hit with a loaf of bread, and underneath it reads, "Congratulations, you were there." You ask what it is. "Souvenir," he says. "Made them myself. 5 copper if you want 2. You laugh, but you also keep the souvenir, because somehow this little piece of carved nonsense feels earned. You survived a tavern brawl. You stayed seated. You didn't get hit with cheese. In medieval terms, that's a win. Morning has surrendered to afternoon now, and the sun, what little of it you can see through the warped glass and soot-dark windows, has slunk halfway down the sky like it's also trying to escape paying taxes. The tavern is calmer than before, though that's not saying much. Let's call it a simmering pot rather than a boiling one. You're contemplating a second bowl of stew. You swear it's less suspicious this time when you notice the parchment man enter. He's lanky, with ink-stained fingers and a permanent hunch from a life bent over scrolls. A long leather case is strapped to his back, and his robe is patched in more places than it isn't. No one cheers when he arrives, but a few heads turn. A few mugs pause mid-sip. He's a scribe, but more importantly, a guild scribe. Part messenger, part witness, part walking bureaucracy. He carries with him the kind of energy that says, there will be signatures, and at least one deeply boring announcement. Sure enough, he walks up to the central table, clears his throat, and begins unrolling a scroll that might actually be longer than your bed upstairs. I hereby call to order this session of the Cooper and Tanner's Mutual Aid Association, he begins. And just like that, the tavern is now a guild hall. Mainstream historical fact. In many towns' guilds, groups of tradespeople organized by craft use taverns as their regular meeting spots. Agreements were signed, apprentices were sworn in, and disputes were settled over ale and under watchful eyes. Fringe tidbit. Some guild meetings involved ceremonial drinking rituals, like passing a single tankard around while reciting the names of deceased members. One guild required you to drink stand on one leg while naming every saint associated with your craft. Medieval hazing, essentially. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether guilds using taverns for meetings helped democratize access to decision-making, or whether it was just because no one wanted to build a separate meeting room. The scribe continues reading in that nasal tone that makes every word sound like it's allergic to itself. And we acknowledge Brother Thaddeus, who has completed his 3rd year of apprenticeship without accidentally setting fire to anything. Scattered applause. One man coughs. And we also note that the guild treasurer still has not returned the ceremonial spoon, and is now subject to a fine of 6 boiled eggs and public shame. Laughter. You glance at Oswin, who whispers, "That spoon's been missing for months." It's probably in the stew pot. You watch as the guild meeting unfolds with a strange blend of pomp and disinterest. One man is clearly asleep. Another is doodling in the margins of the scroll. A third is trying to balance a spoon on his nose. And yet, this chaotic congregation is how things get done. The scribe eventually calls forward a wide-eyed boy with soot-black fingers and a nervous twitch. "Apprentice Jakob, do you swear to uphold the standards of the Tanners Guild?" Jakob nods so fast you worry he'll fall over. The scribe hands him a wooden emblem, declares him part of the lineage, and someone somewhere starts a song that is either a guild anthem or a drinking tune with the words swapped out. The room joins in. You don't know the words, but you hum anyway. The scribe packs his scroll, nods once, and disappears as quickly as he arrived. A few of the guild members stay behind, toasting the apprentice and discussing leather with a level of passion usually reserved for battle strategy or roast ducks. One proudly displays a belt he made. Another criticizes its stitching. A third buys the belt anyway. You sit back and take it all in. What began as a stew-soaked den of drink and dice has, over the course of the day, become a parliament, a job fair, and now a graduation ceremony. A man near the hearth pulls out a small chest and begins sorting coins into stacks with the focus of a monk. He's a money changer, Oswin tells you. People bring in foreign coins, old weights, buttons they're pretending are coins. He knows the difference. Nearby, a woman is sketching something in charcoal on the back of a broken serving tray. You look over and realize it's you. Sort of. A sleepy-eyed traveler holding a spoon like a sword. You ask why? She shrugs. You look like someone who needs a portrait or a warning sign. Fair enough. Someone else stumbles in. A wide man in a red cloak, carrying a goose under one arm and an annoyed expression under the other. Where's the reeve? He growls. He left, says the innkeeper, but you can leave your complaint in the mug by the fire. The man does just that. Drops in a note, then the goose, then leaves. Everyone accepts this without question. Mainstream historical fact. Complaint systems in villages were often unofficial. A mug, a nail on the wall, a word in the ear of the barkeep. Taverns became both the courthouse and the rumor mill. Fringe tidbit? In some places, complaints left in taverns had to be sung at next week's market day if not resolved. Imagine having to explain your stolen goat in verse. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether this system fostered true accountability, or just created an ecosystem of passive-aggressive ballads and goat-themed limericks. Back at your table, the guild meeting has ended, and you're left with a strange sense of grounding. You came for a drink and a fire, but now you've witnessed a trade deal, promotion, a fine, and what may have been a sacred goose ritual. And somehow you feel more connected than ever, because this place, this loud, lopsided, smoky room, isn't more than a pub. It's a mirror of the entire village, squeezed into 4 crooked walls and a fireplace that burns too hot. It's messy, yes, loud often, occasionally violent and rarely clean. But it works. Not because anyone is in control, but because everyone is contributing something. Even if it's just a song, or a spoon, or a truly terrible painting of your face. And for the first time today, you feel less like a visitor, and more like a local. By now, the sun is sinking behind the rooftops like it's had one too many pints and needs a lie down. Shadows stretch across the tavern floor. The fire glows a little deeper, and that familiar, comforting haze begins to descend again. You recognize it now, the second wind of tavern life. The part where the day folk go home and the night creatures stretch their backs, crack their knuckles, and begin to roam. You're still here, of course you are. You've eaten stew, drunk dubious ale, watched a guild apprentice get knighted with a spoon, and survived a flying cheese wheel. You've earned your second drink. Matilda refills your mug herself, no words. Just a small, approving grunt. It feels like a hug from someone who'd never admit they care. You sit back and take in the room. It's grown quieter. Not quiet, just quieter. The kind of hush that says everyone's settling into something slower. Lower tones, softer laughter. Stories told not for applause, but just to remember. You listen. An old man near the hearth is explaining how he once outran 3 tacksmen and a priest by pretending to be his own twin. A woman on the next bench over says she once broke a bandit's nose with a wheel of cheese. The bard, looking very much alive again, plays a soft tune about a sailor who fell in love with a foghorn. You notice people you hadn't earlier. A baker kneading dough near the back table, prepping loaves for morning. A weaver mending torn sleeves for coin and compliments. A boy scrubbing tankards until his arms ache, humming a tune you recognize from last night. And somewhere behind it all, the tavern breathes. The hearth spits sparks that dance like fireflies. The windows glow faintly gold from candlelight. The air is thick with roasted something, wood smoke, and the salt-sour tang of sweat, beer, and ancient onions. And you realize something simple but massive. You don't want to leave yet. Mainstream historical fact? Many medieval travelers stayed at taverns for days, not hours, especially if roads were bad or weather worse. The tavern became temporary home, office, and sanctuary all at once. Fringe tidbit? In some rural regions, regulars kept their own mugs behind the bar. Not because they were fancy, because sharing mugs with strangers meant sharing mouthfuls of old plague. Open scholarly debate? Historians still argue whether people stayed in taverns for comfort or necessity. Most agree, probably both. Warmth is warmth, even if it smells like pickled eggs and regret. You stretch your legs under the bench. Your muscles ache, but in that satisfying, I earned this way. Oswin returns from wherever he'd wandered, now wearing someone else's hat. You don't ask. He sits beside you, drinks deeply, and says, "Did you see the goose again?" You shake your head. He sighs. That's the thing about the goose. You only see it when you're ready. You nod as if that makes sense. He points to the hearth. Remember earlier, when the fight broke out? I saw two people fall in love mid-brawl, right in the chaos. She threw a potato, he caught it, their eyes met. Bam. Destiny. You smile, he's probably lying, but here, in this place, everything might be true. Someone starts singing, not loudly, not for attention, just softly. A simple tune. Others join in, not perfectly, but honestly. And you? You hum along, because in this room filled with crumbs and mud and flickering light, no one expects perfection. Just presence, just people. You feel the warmth of the fire on your face, the solid weight of the bench beneath you, the quiet joy of knowing that no one here needs you to be anything more than present. You raise your mug and toast to no one in particular, and someone, somewhere, toasts back. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to soak it in. The sounds, the smells, the feeling of belonging to something old and loud and weirdly beautiful. This place is cracked and crowded and smells faintly like goat, but it is alive. Not preserved like a museum, not remembered like a story, but lived. Day after day, night after strange, echoing night. And somehow, in this crooked corner of a crooked world, you found something steady. And as the room fades into murmurs, candle flickers, and the soft clink of mugs being washed, you find yourself thinking, maybe I'll stay just one more night. And now, dear traveler, as the fire burns low and the last of the stew is scraped from the pot, let yourself settle into stillness. The bench beneath you creaks with the weight of memory. The stone floor radiates the last warmth of the hearth. The air carries only the softest sounds now. A mug set down, a broom sweeping up ash. The distant snore of someone far too comfortable for such a lumpy mattress. You've wandered through the smoke and song, seen brawls and blessings, watched secrets exchange like coin and broken bread with strangers who now feel oddly familiar. Let those stories drift now, gently like embers riding the updraft, until they fade, not away, inward. Let the rhythm of the tavern, the hum of voices, the thrum of footfalls, the hush after laughter, become your rhythm. Slow, even. Soft where breathe in the scent of old oak and sleep-warmed wool. Let your muscles uncoil. Let your thoughts fall quiet. And know this, even in another century, another place, another life, this crooked little tavern is waiting for you. Same smoke, same song, same stew, same warmth in the cold, so rest now. Lay down your cup. Close your eyes and let the candlelight fade. We'll be here when you wake.